Hey everybody, I'm Rick Beato. Okay, so this is just some observations that I've been making over the past couple weeks about where the music business is now and kind of where it was in 1994 when I moved to Atlanta when I was 32 years old. So the reason I moved down here was to try and find people to play with in a band and do my own music. There were music rehearsal spaces around town here that bands rehearsed at. There's probably about 4 or 5 of them. One of them was called Black Box. It had about 50 rooms or so. There's another one called Avatar that had a bunch of rooms, maybe about the same, with a couple of huge rooms that you could rehearse on a stage. There was another place called Metro that was near the Masquerade, which is actually in a different spot now, that my band rehearsed in, that probably had 35 different rehearsal spaces in. And there were a number of others. These were all full of bands that rehearsed all the time. So day and night, you can go in there. They're open 24 hours. You can go in and rehearse. This wasn't just Atlanta. This was every city. If you went to Seattle like I did in 1992, there was a number of rehearsal spaces around Seattle that all those Seattle bands rehearsed in. But there were also rehearsal spaces in Phoenix and Los Angeles and New York City. Before I moved here in 1994, I was living in New York, 93, 94, and I played in bands there, and I lived in the East Village. I lived on First Ave between 7th and St. Mark's. And how did I do that? Because I had a job as a bartender on a boat. And the money I made from that enabled me to not only pay for my rent, which you could never do today, but I also could go to practice spaces and practice with the 5 different bands that I played in, because they all had practice spaces in Manhattan. And then eventually, when you couldn't afford to do it in Manhattan, people went to Brooklyn, and now you can't do it in Brooklyn because that's too expensive. But the fact of the matter is that you could work a regular job and afford to do that. Like when I moved here to Atlanta, I worked as a music teacher in a store called Buckhead Music. I taught 50 students a week and made $500. And with that $500, I paid my rent, which was typically about $300-400 a month. I had roommates, and I paid for our rehearsal space. I chipped in with the other 3 guys in the band, and we also paid to go in and record. I became a producer in 1999. The first gigs that I did were local bands, and then I got some major label things. Like I did this band, Left Front Tire, that had a song on the American Pie 2 soundtrack. And then I got this band, Shinedown, that I did a few songs on their first record, which was a double platinum record. And eventually, over time, I did a few more major label records, but those records and budgets started to go away around 2005. After the financial crisis, 2008, rock music basically died around 2012, right when Facebook and Twitter came online and we were in the social media era, full on. If you go back to the late 90s, you started seeing these boy bands, NSYNC, Backstreet Boys, you saw Britney Spears, and then you had this whole, I guess we just call it manufactured music that had professional songwriters and producers that worked on music, and then that started to bleed into things that I produced, because I was one of the people that did that. Why do I bring all this up? Because now we're in 2026. When I do these top 10 countdowns on Spotify, I go back after I make the video and I look at the artists and I see what their background is. And invariably, the artists that are popular, almost all of them, are from wealthy parents and work with professional songwriters. Now, having wealthy parents is not something new in the music business. Taylor Swift's dad, Scott Swift, invested, this is known, invested $500,000, I think it was, into her record label, Big Machine, back when she first started. Go to nowadays, you look at people like Gracie Abrams. Her dad, J.J. Abrams, you know who he is. He's a famous producer and movie filmmaker. Her best friend is this, or one of her best friends, I just was listening to, Audrey Hobart. Audrey has a brother that is also a songwriter called Malcolm Todd, but his name is really Malcolm Todd Hobart. Audrey has a couple million monthly listeners on Spotify. Malcolm Todd has 23 million monthly listeners, but their father was the writer and producer for Scrubs and The Middle. Sabrina Carpenter's aunt was the voice of Bart Simpson. We can go on and on. Most of the people that make it in the music business now have parents that are famous, or that are in the film or TV business or music business, or they're really wealthy. Because only wealthy people, unfortunately, for the most part, can focus on music and doing music as a career, because they don't have to work. Now, they may have jobs and work, but they don't have the pressure of that. Not only that, but they have their parents that can put in the money to hire the biggest producers engineers, mixers, and songwriters to come in and work with their kids. That doesn't mean that their kids don't have talent. Gracie Abrams is a great singer. I say this a lot of time, instruments don't play themselves, right? So you can be the child of someone famous and wealthy and also be an excellent musician. If you look back historically, bands like the Beatles, Black Sabbath, AC/DC, The Who, The Kinks, Nirvana, Alice in Chains, Soundgarden, Pearl Jam, Smashing Pumpkins, Oasis, The White Stripes, these are all working class bands that come from very humble beginnings and can tell stories based on their upbringing, something that rich people frankly can't do. If the people are not from wealthy families, then you can bet on the fact that if they're pop artists, they are signed to a publisher that's a famous producer. Because most of the big producers out there, I don't need to mention names, I've interviewed some of them on my channel. These pop producers have their own publishing companies, and they might have 100 songwriters that are signed to their publishing company. And why is that? Because they can afford to pay them $50,000, $100,000 advances to live, because the people need money to make their music, or you could say make their art, if you consider it art. I consider it art. It's their own type of art. There is no money in the music business like there was. Yes, people can make millions of dollars doing it, but it's such a small number of people that can do that. One of the things that most people won't tell you, big producers, big engineers, mixers, songwriters, is that they make a lot of their income through vanity projects with rich people. Billionaires that had bands when they were in high school, or kids of wealthy people. I did so much of this stuff myself. This has been going on since the early 2000s. Once money from record deals started to disappear, that's what people were left with. So most of the things that you see out there that are developed by people are financed by parents of rich kids. If you just investigate people that are in the charts and go and look at their background, you will see that. You can put the names in the comments section of the people, but you will find that it's almost impossible to make it as a musician nowadays if you're young, unless you have rich parents. It's just my own observation. Love to know your thoughts. Hit subscribe. Thanks for watching.